"You don't control me, we're not even engaged," she said, and that's when I knew our 3-year relationship was actually over. I should mention that I just walked into Murphy's Tavern after a 12-hour day at my custom boat engine repair shop, looking forward to meeting Jenna for what I thought was our regular Thursday dinner. The smell of fried shrimp and salt air mixed with the sound of blues guitar from the corner stage, creating the perfect atmosphere for what should have been a relaxing evening with my girlfriend. Instead, I found my girlfriend of 3 years laughing with some bartender who was scribbling his number on her cocktail napkin like they were teenagers passing notes in study hall. I stood there for a moment, watching her flip her hair and lean forward in that way she did when she wanted male attention, completely absorbed in the stranger who was clearly hitting on her. The bartender couldn't have been more than 25, probably some college kid working his way through Georgia Southern, but Jenna was eating up his attention like she was starving for it. When I walked over and quietly asked if we could talk, she looked genuinely annoyed that I'd interrupted her flirting session. She didn't even seem embarrassed about being caught, just irritated that I'd shown up at the time we'd agreed to meet. Her cocktail glass was nearly empty, some pink concoction that probably cost $15, and she was wearing the diamond earrings I'd bought her for our second anniversary. I asked her what was happening with the bartender situation, keeping my voice calm and reasonable, and that's when she exploded with her declaration about not being engaged and me not controlling her. She went on to explain that we were just having fun together, that I was being possessive and jealous for questioning why she was collecting phone numbers from random men while I was working to support both of us. The conversation became increasingly surreal as she justified her behavior by claiming that commitment was just a social construct designed to control women, and that she needed to explore her options to make sure she was making the right choice about her future. The irony wasn't lost on me that this woman who lived in our expensive historic district loft, drove the car I helped finance, and wore the jewelry I'd bought her for various anniversaries was suddenly positioning herself as some free spirit who couldn't be tied down by conventional relationship expectations. She'd never expressed any of these philosophical concerns about commitment during the 3 years I'd been paying 2/3 of our rent, covering her Pilates studio membership, and taking her on weekend trips to Charleston and Asheville. I realized in that moment that Jenna wanted to have her cake and eat it too, all the benefits and security of our serious relationship, including the financial stability and emotional support, while maintaining complete freedom to flirt with other men and explore her options whenever she felt like it. She wanted me to be her steady provider and emotional anchor, but only when it was convenient for her, while she kept one foot out the door in case something better came along. The bartender had moved on to serve other customers, but she was still clutching his phone number like it represented some kind of liberation from our oppressive relationship where I did things like show up when we had plans and expect basic respect in return. I looked at her sitting there, defiant and self-righteous, and something clicked into place in my mind with the clarity of a perfectly tuned engine. She was absolutely right about one thing: we weren't engaged, and I wasn't going to control her or beg her to respect our relationship if she didn't want to. I told her she was completely correct that we weren't engaged, that she was free to do whatever she wanted, and that I respected her desire for independence. The look of confusion that crossed her face was almost amusing, like she'd expected me to argue or plead with her to choose me over her newfound freedom. Instead, I wished her a good evening and walked out of that tavern with absolute clarity about what I needed to do next. As I drove home through the Spanish moss-lined streets of Savannah, past the historic squares and antebellum mansions that made this city so beautiful, I started mentally cataloging everything I'd need to move out of our shared loft, because if Jenna wanted to be completely free and unattached, then she was going to get exactly what she'd asked for. I started my exodus the very next morning while Jenna was teaching her early Pilates classes at that upscale studio where she spent more time networking with wealthy clients than actually working out herself. The timing was perfect since she had back-to-back sessions from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, giving me 8 solid hours to methodically remove my life from our shared space without any dramatic confrontations or last-minute manipulation attempts. I'd called my friend Cole the night before, explaining the situation in the straightforward way you describe a mechanical problem that needed fixing, and he immediately offered to help with his pickup truck and trailer. Cole understood the dynamics better than most people because he'd watched Jenna's behavior evolve over the past year, noting how she'd become increasingly entitled and dismissive while simultaneously more dependent on my financial support. The apartment we'd shared for 2 years was a beautiful converted loft in Savannah's historic district, with exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, and tall windows overlooking the Savannah River, but most of the furniture that made it livable was mine. I'd brought the leather couch I'd saved up for during my apprenticeship, the dining table my grandfather had built by hand, the bedroom set I'd carefully selected when I got my first promotion, and practically every appliance in the kitchen, including the espresso machine that Jenna used religiously every morning. As Cole and I loaded my belongings into his truck, I felt a strange sense of relief rather than sadness, like I was finally doing something that should have happened months ago when the warning signs first appeared. We worked efficiently and quietly, wrapping furniture in moving blankets and carefully boxing up my tools, books, and personal belongings while leaving absolutely nothing that belonged to Jenna or that she could claim was a shared purchase. Cole had found me a small one-bedroom apartment near the marina where I could hear the boats at night and walk to work when the weather was nice, and the rent was exactly half of what I'd been paying for our expensive loft. Our roommate Ivy was at her job at the Telfair Museums, where she worked as an archivist preserving Civil War documents and colonial artifacts, but she'd left me a note saying she was sorry to see me go and that she understood my decision completely. Ivy had always been the most observant person in our social circle, quietly taking in details that others missed, and she'd mentioned to Cole that Jenna had been bragging to her Pilates clients about keeping her options open while having a boyfriend who took care of all the practical aspects of adult life. According to Ivy, Jenna seemed to view our relationship as the perfect safety net that allowed her to flirt and explore without any real consequences, since she always had someone reliable to come home to who would handle the bills, the planning, and all the boring responsible stuff she didn't want to deal with. I spent the afternoon documenting every financial contribution I'd made to our shared life, from rent payments and utility bills to groceries and the expensive organic products she insisted we buy, creating a comprehensive record that showed exactly how much of her lifestyle had been subsidized by my income. The numbers were staggering when I added them up over 3 years, easily equivalent to a decent used car or a substantial down payment on a house, money that had essentially vanished into funding someone else's comfortable existence while she maintained the luxury of treating commitment as optional. Cole helped me set up the essentials in my new place, and as we arranged my furniture in the smaller space, he commented on how much more peaceful the atmosphere felt compared to the tension that had been building in the loft over the past several months. I planned to leave Jenna a simple note explaining that since she wanted complete freedom and viewed our relationship as just having fun together, I was giving her exactly what she'd requested by removing myself and all the obligations that came with being in a committed partnership. Jenna returned from her weekend party trip to Tybee Island on Sunday afternoon, probably expecting to find me waiting with dinner plans and the usual routine of catching up on her social adventures while I handled the mundane details of our shared life. Instead, she walked into an apartment that looked like it had been surgically stripped of everything that made it functional or comfortable, leaving behind only her belongings and the harsh reality of what the space actually cost to maintain. I could only imagine her face as she processed the empty living room where my leather couch and entertainment center used to be, the kitchen missing my coffee maker and the dining table where we'd shared countless meals, and the bedroom reduced to just her mattress on the floor since the bed frame and dresser had been mine as well. The note I'd left was propped against the kitchen counter where she couldn't miss it, written in the same matter-of-fact tone I used for work estimates and repair invoices. "Perfect, you're completely free now, just like you wanted," it read. "Since I was being too controlling for someone you're just having fun with, I figured you'd prefer total independence. Rent's due on the 15th, signed Wyatt." I deliberately kept the message brief and factual, avoiding any emotional language or accusations that she could twist into making herself the victim of some unreasonable ultimatum. Within 20 minutes of what must have been her discovery, my phone started buzzing with calls and texts that escalated from confused to angry to desperate with impressive speed. The first message asked where all the furniture had gone, as if my belongings had somehow vanished mysteriously rather than being removed by their actual owner. When I didn't respond immediately, she started calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that swung between outrage at my audacity and panic about how she was supposed to afford the apartment alone. I waited until Monday evening to respond to her messages, maintaining the same calm tone I'd used in person and simply explaining that I was respecting the relationship boundaries she'd established at Murphy's Tavern. When she demanded to know how I could abandon her like this, I reminded her that people who are just having fun together don't typically have long-term financial obligations or shared living arrangements, and that I was simply adjusting our situation to match the casual nature of what she described. The calls became more desperate over the following days, with Jenna alternating between trying to guilt me about our history together and insisting that I'd completely misunderstood what she meant about not being engaged and wanting freedom. She claimed that wanting to keep her options open didn't mean she wanted me to disappear entirely, just that she needed space to figure things out without feeling pressured into premature commitment. I found it fascinating how someone who'd been so definitive about not wanting to be controlled was now furious that I'd taken her at her word and stopped participating in the controlling behavior of paying her bills and providing financial stability. Cole witnessed one of her complete breakdowns firsthand when she showed up at his apartment looking for me, alternating between tears and rage as she insisted that I was being cruel and vindictive by taking away everything we'd built together. According to Cole, she seemed genuinely shocked that I'd actually followed through with leaving, as if she'd expected our confrontation to be just another argument that would blow over once I came to my senses and accepted her terms for our relationship. She kept insisting to Cole that she'd never wanted things to end, just wanted more freedom within the relationship, but couldn't seem to grasp that freedom and financial dependence were mutually exclusive concepts that couldn't coexist indefinitely. The weeks following my departure became a masterclass in watching someone discover the actual cost of independence when they'd spent years taking it for granted that someone else would handle all the inconvenient parts of adult life. Jenna's contact attempts shifted from angry demands for explanations to increasingly desperate requests for help with situations that she'd never had to navigate alone during our 3 years together. The first emergency came just 5 days after I'd moved out, when the air conditioning in our former loft broke during one of Savannah's brutal August heat waves, and she called me in a panic expecting me to handle the repair arrangements and split the cost like we always had. I listened patiently to her explanation of the problem, acknowledged that living without air conditioning in Georgia summer weather was genuinely miserable, and then politely suggested she contact a repair service since she was now the sole resident responsible for maintenance issues. When she protested that she didn't know any reliable repair companies and had never dealt with contractors before, I reminded her that learning to handle these situations was part of the independence she'd wanted so badly. The second crisis involved her car breaking down in the parking lot of her Pilates studio, leaving her stranded and expecting me to drop everything to come rescue her like I'd done countless times throughout our relationship. Instead of rushing over with jumper cables and a solution, I recommended she call a towing service or roadside assistance, treating her exactly like I would any casual acquaintance who'd mentioned having car trouble. Her response was a mixture of disbelief and indignation that I could be so cold toward someone I'd supposedly cared about, completely missing the irony that she'd defined our relationship as casual fun rather than the serious partnership where people actually help each other through emergencies. The pattern continued with increasing frequency as Jenna encountered one practical challenge after another, each one highlighting how much she'd relied on my presence to navigate the basic responsibilities of independent living. She called about finding a co-signer for a cheaper apartment lease, handling a dispute with her landlord over water damage, dealing with a fraudulent charge on her credit card, and even asking for help assembling furniture she'd ordered online. Each time, I responded with the same courteous but detached tone I'd use with anyone who was just having fun rather than building a serious life together, offering general suggestions but making it clear that these were her problems to solve as a free and independent person. The most revealing conversation came when she tried to guilt me about abandoning our special connection and leaving her to handle everything alone, as if I'd somehow betrayed our friendship by not continuing to serve as her personal problem-solving service. I reminded her that people who are just having fun together don't typically serve as each other's financial safety nets, emergency contacts, or unpaid personal assistants, and that I was simply respecting the boundaries she'd established about the casual nature of our relationship. When she insisted that I was being deliberately cruel and taking her words out of context, I explained that actions have consequences and that choosing to keep your options open inevitably means giving up the security that comes with committed partnership. She seemed genuinely baffled by the concept that wanting relationship flexibility meant accepting the responsibility of handling life's challenges without a built-in support system, as if she'd expected to maintain all the practical benefits of our partnership while enjoying the emotional freedom of being single. The cognitive dissonance became even more apparent when she started complaining to mutual friends about my selfishness in refusing to help someone I'd supposedly loved, completely rewriting the narrative to position herself as the victim of my sudden personality change rather than someone experiencing the natural consequences of her own choices. According to Cole and Ivy, she'd begun telling people that I'd become bitter and vindictive after our breakup, conveniently omitting the part where she'd explicitly stated that we were just having fun together and that my expectations of commitment were controlling behavior she didn't want to tolerate. What I hadn't expected was how naturally my friendship with Ivy would evolve into something deeper and more meaningful than anything I'd experienced during my years with Jenna. It started innocently enough when Ivy mentioned that she'd found an antique desk at an estate sale but needed help getting it up to her apartment and restored to its original condition. I'd always enjoyed working with my hands, and the project gave me something constructive to focus on during the evenings when I might otherwise have been dwelling on the dramatic upheaval in my personal life. The desk was a beautiful piece from the 1920s, solid oak with intricate carved details that had been hidden under layers of paint and neglect, and as we worked together to strip away the old finish and reveal the original wood grain, I discovered that Ivy had an eye for detail and craftsmanship that matched my own appreciation for quality work done right. Our conversations during those restoration sessions revealed how much we had in common beyond just the shared experience of living with Jenna's increasingly entitled behavior over the past year. Ivy was methodical and thoughtful in her approach to both her museum work and personal projects, someone who understood that building something worthwhile required patience, planning, and genuine investment rather than just hoping things would work out through luck or other people's efforts. She'd been quietly saving money from her archivist salary for 2 years with the goal of purchasing a small historic cottage in one of Savannah's residential neighborhoods, researching properties and neighborhoods with the same scholarly thoroughness she applied to preserving Civil War documents and colonial artifacts. Unlike my relationship with Jenna, which had always felt like I was pulling most of the weight while she enjoyed the benefits, my developing partnership with Ivy felt genuinely balanced from the beginning. She insisted on paying for half of the refinishing supplies and contributed her own expertise about wood preservation techniques she'd learned through her museum work, treating our collaboration as exactly that rather than assuming I'd handle all the practical and financial aspects while she provided moral support. When we started spending time together outside of the desk restoration project, grabbing coffee or walking through Forsyth Park, our conversations flowed naturally between topics that actually mattered to both of us rather than the superficial social updates and complaints about work that had characterized most of my interactions with Jenna. Ivy was genuinely interested in my boat engine repair business and asked thoughtful questions about the technical challenges and satisfaction of bringing old marine engines back to life, while I found myself fascinated by her work preserving historical documents and artifacts that might otherwise be lost to time and neglect. The transition from friendship to romance happened so gradually that I barely noticed it until we were spending most evenings together, working on various projects around her apartment or mine and talking about our shared vision for the kind of stable, purposeful life we wanted to build. When Jenna inevitably discovered through mutual friends that Ivy and I were seeing each other, her reaction was swift and predictably dramatic. She confronted me at my marina apartment one evening, accusing me of emotional betrayal and claiming that I'd obviously been developing feelings for Ivy while we were still together, which explained my sudden coldness and willingness to abandon our relationship. I listened to her accusations with the same calm attention I gave to diagnosing engine problems, then pointed out that people who are just having fun together don't typically have claims on each other's romantic lives or emotional investments. When she insisted that what we'd had was special and that moving on so quickly proved I'd never really cared about her, I reminded her that she'd been the one collecting phone numbers from bartenders and talking about keeping her options open, not me. The consequences of Jenna's choices became increasingly apparent as the months passed, and she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she'd taken for granted while having someone else handle all the financial heavy lifting and practical responsibilities. Unable to afford the expensive historic district loft on her Pilates instructor salary alone, she'd started desperately searching for roommates but discovered that her requirements were scaring away anyone who might actually be a reliable housemate. She needed someone who wouldn't judge her lifestyle choices, which apparently meant accepting her habit of bringing different men home from bars and hosting impromptu parties that lasted until 3 in the morning on weeknights. She also needed someone flexible about rent payments, since her income from the Pilates studio was irregular and she'd grown accustomed to having financial backup when her budgeting skills inevitably fell short of her spending habits. The first potential roommate lasted exactly 1 week after witnessing Jenna throw a tantrum about having to buy groceries and clean the apartment herself, behaviors that had never been issues when I was handling the domestic maintenance and covering most of the household expenses. The second candidate backed out after Jenna mentioned during the interview that she was looking for someone who understood that relationships were fluid and that commitment was an outdated concept, which most normal people interpreted as a warning that she'd create drama and chaos in any shared living situation. Eventually, out of desperation and with the landlord threatening eviction for late rent payments, Jenna accepted a roommate who seemed perfect on paper but turned out to be exactly the kind of person who responds to ads from someone with unrealistic expectations and poor boundaries. Marcus was a 23-year-old aspiring musician who claimed to have regular income from session work but actually spent most of his time throwing unauthorized parties in the loft while Jenna was at work, inviting friends who had no respect for the historic building or the expensive hardwood floors that had been one of the main selling points of the apartment. Within a month, the neighbors were filing noise complaints, the landlord was documenting property damage from cigarette burns and spilled drinks, and Marcus had disappeared overnight after accumulating 3 months of unpaid utilities and leaving behind a collection of damaged musical equipment and angry creditors who kept calling the apartment looking for him. Meanwhile, Ivy and I had not only found the perfect historic cottage in the Thomas Square neighborhood but had successfully navigated the purchasing process together, combining her careful savings with my steady income and both of our meticulous research skills to secure a property that needed work but had incredible potential. The house was a 1920s bungalow with original pine floors, a working fireplace, and a garden space where Ivy planned to grow herbs and vegetables while I set up a workshop in the detached garage for boat engine projects and furniture restoration. Our approach to homeownership reflected the same balanced partnership that had characterized our entire relationship, with both of us contributing equally to the down payment, sharing research responsibilities, and making decisions together based on practical considerations rather than romantic fantasies or social media appeal. The renovation process became a natural extension of our collaborative dynamic, with Ivy handling the historical research to ensure any changes respected the home's architectural integrity while I focused on the mechanical and structural improvements that would make the house both beautiful and functional for modern living. Cole often stopped by to help with projects and observed that our working relationship had an ease and mutual respect that had been completely absent from the tense atmosphere that characterized the final months of my relationship with Jenna, where every decision had become a negotiation and every expense had created conflict about priorities and financial responsibility. 2 years after that confrontation at Murphy's Tavern, the natural consequences of Jenna's choices had played out exactly as predictably as a well-tuned engine following the laws of physics. Facing eviction from the historic district loft and drowning in debt from Marcus's abandoned utility bills and property damage charges, she'd been forced to move back in with her family in rural Georgia and accept a position teaching basic fitness classes at a community center for a fraction of her previous income. The transition from her carefully curated Savannah lifestyle to small-town reality had been brutal, according to the occasional updates that filtered through our mutual friend network, with Jenna struggling to adjust to living under her parents' rules and earning barely enough to cover her car payment and student loans. Cole's engagement party provided an unexpected opportunity to see how dramatically our paths had diverged since that evening when she declared we were just having fun together. Ivy and I arrived as a couple who'd built something genuine and lasting, comfortable in our shared achievements and excited about the future we were creating together. We just finished renovating the kitchen in our cottage, turning it into a beautiful space where we cooked together and hosted friends. And Ivy was wearing the antique engagement ring I'd found at an estate sale and had restored to its original beauty. Jenna appeared at the party looking diminished in ways that went beyond the obvious financial constraints, dressed in clothes that didn't quite fit right and carrying herself with none of the confident entitlement that had once defined her personality. When she spotted us across Cole's backyard, Her face went through a series of expressions that revealed exactly how much she'd lost by choosing momentary freedom over long-term partnership. She watched us interact with other guests, clearly noting the easy affection between Ivy and me and the respect our friends showed for what we'd built together, and I could see her calculating the difference between our stability and her current circumstances. The brief conversation we had was polite but illuminating, with Jenna congratulating us on our engagement while her eyes took in every detail of our obvious happiness and success. She mentioned her new job and living situation with forced cheerfulness, but couldn't hide the regret in her voice when she asked if we were happy in our cottage and if I'd continued with boat engine repair. When Ivy excused herself to get drinks, Jenna's mask slipped completely and she admitted that she'd made terrible mistakes, that she'd never realized how much stability and security I'd provided until it was gone, and she had to navigate everything alone. I listened with genuine sympathy for someone who'd learned hard lessons about the relationship between choices and consequences, but felt no temptation to relitigate the past or offer false comfort about decisions that couldn't be undone. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that my actions hadn't been vindictive or cruel, just a natural response to someone who'd clearly defined the terms of our relationship and then been surprised when I honored exactly what she'd requested. Jenna had wanted complete freedom without responsibility, the excitement of keeping her options open without the boring stability of committed partnership, and she'd gotten exactly that along with all the inevitable consequences that come with such choices. The story had a perfect symmetry that appealed to my mechanical mind, with every action producing its logical result and every choice leading to its natural conclusion, proving that treating genuine partnership like a convenience store you can visit whenever needed eventually leaves you with neither the convenience nor the genuine connection.